Hi, do you like bowling? Well, me neither, but it's really fun to create the rigid body simulation of bowlings. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a simulation of rigid body like this using Maya. So we have the ball, and that ball is identified as an active rigid body. Now those pins are also active rigid bodies. But on the other hand, the bowling alley is actually passive rigid body. In this video, I'm going to talk about how you can set them up and also how you can change the initial velocity of this ball in order for it to do an impact. And on top of that, notice how there's a different feeling between the mass of the ball versus the mass of those pins. So I'm also going to show you how you can change the mass of those pins in a way that they would behave more lightly than this big heavy ball. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to show you in this demonstration is how to remove rigid body simulation from objects. So I have simulations on all of these objects. Instead of going one by one, I'm going to go to edit, then delete all by type, and then go all the way down to rigid bodies, and then that's going to remove all the rigid bodies. It's important to know how to do that. Now, next what I want to do is to have this ball here to have a force that is going to drive it. So also, I want it to collide with other objects, and therefore I need to go into the Effects tab, then to go to Fields and Solvers. This menu is very important, especially in this demo, so I'm going to tear it off. Then I'm going to go with Create Active Rigid Body. Once I do that, if I hit Ctrl A to go to the Attribute Editor, then you'll see here we have initial velocity on X, Y, and Z. We also have initial spin. So that would be very interesting to do for a ball. So it would be kind of spinning and sort of curving. So I'm going to go and change the initial velocity on the Z. And anytime you're confused, you can always move it around just a little bit and see the numbers here moving, and then you would know, okay. So if you were ever confused, you can always double check this way. So now what I want to do is to have it moving on the Z, but in the negative value, because you can see here the direction of the arrow is going to point to the positive. So this is going to be in the positive Z, and this is going to be the negative Z. So I'm going to go to the Z initial velocity and give it maybe -30. Now if I hit play, this is what's going to happen. And notice that it's not having any decay. Infinite, endless. And the reason why it's not decaying is because there's no gravity to pull it down. So I'm going to select that ball, and then in this menu here, as I mentioned, it's a very important menu, so we're going to be pulling a lot of stuff from it. I'm going to go into gravity. Now there is a gravity force that is affecting this ball. So when I hit play, there it is. Now it's going through this plane. Now this plane is supposed to be a passive collider, meaning that it doesn't move, but it can acknowledge objects that are active rigid bodies, and therefore it would bounce them off of it. So I select that alley and then go to Create Passive Rigid Body. So when I go to the beginning of the timeline, play, now the ball is bouncing. Oops, notice how it's going through the pins. And that's because those pins are not acknowledged at all, and I need to make them active rigid bodies. If I were to select these pins and make them passive rigid bodies, which is not supposed to be the way, But I'm just doing this just so you can see exactly the difference between what a passive rigid body does versus an active one. So now if I go here to the beginning and hit play, notice what's going to happen. Boom. So they are passive. They bounce active rigid bodies off of them, but they don't move. So that's not good for this simulation. So hit escape, go back to the beginning of the timeline, and then I can go to edit, delete by type, and then rigid bodies. Now I have them selected. I'm gonna go and click on active rigid bodies. Okay, so let's play the simulation now. Notice that slow motion effect. It's beautiful, but it's not really realistic. And the reason for that is simply just like the beginning of the simulation where the ball was just going endless. There's no gravity for them to pull them down. So I'm gonna go here to the same menu and click on gravity. Then hit play. Okay, so now it's playing, and you might be thinking, well, the simulation is playing slow, that's why the movement is pretty slow. But that's not the reason why those pins feel really heavy. The reason why they feel really heavy is because their mass is as big or heavy, if you must, as the ball, and that's not supposed to be the case. So for that reason, I'm going to select all of those pins. I'm going to go into the mass and make it 0.2. So that's going to be 20% the mass of the way they're behaving right now. And that's very interesting change here. So notice now the difference. Okay. Yeah, by the way, like you click all the way back, sometimes the ball doesn't appear, so thanks, Maya.
Stop it. Get some help.
So I'm gonna go here and make this minus 45 to give it more force, and then I'm gonna apply an initial spin, and I'm gonna apply the initial spin on the Y. Okay, if you were wondering why it's on the Y, if you click W, you will see the axis. So technically this is the axis that this ball is supposed to be revolving around to rotate on the Y. So I'm gonna give the rotation on the Y, say 90 or 100, just to make it a little bit noticeable, especially that this is how it goes with the bowling, and that's gonna mess it up. So we'll see. Anyways, I made these borders so it would bounce off of them if it went off track. So let's see. Yeah, that's actually better. So now that I have the simulation, one more thing we can do, and this is specific to the rigid body. It's not available for the nucleus cloth or nucleus dynamic, and that is baking the keys. It's very useful because once you do that, you no longer have to do any processing. Like for instance, if I play the timeline now, okay, these are nice, but then if I go back, it doesn't really give you the actual movement back. It only goes forward. It's kind of really weird. So you have to reset it. But if I select on all of these pieces and deselect that plane, then I'm gonna go to edit, keys, and then bake simulation. It's going to bake frame by frame exactly the animation that is being simulated. Now I have all these keys, and by the way, that baking was in real time, so it went really fast. Yeah, it's pretty good. Now that the animation is baked already, it's not wise to keep the animation and also the simulation, because then there's no point. Just like I demonstrated in the beginning, go to edit and then delete all by type and then go all the way to rigid bodies. So now if I select this object, notice that there's no other information that makes me feel that, hey, there is some sort of simulation. No, it's all real time. So now however you move it, it's actually there, right? So now you can do one of those cool effects of reverse animation, like right? One last thing I want to mention in this video, just so I can provide you with the cohesive and holistic information in order for you to really understand how this process goes. Proxy is the process where you simulate or you animate an object based on a low poly version, and then once you're done, you actually swap the high poly with the low poly. So that process is known to be used for animation and also for simulation. And I could also say especially in simulation. So for instance, these pins are relatively economic in geometry. I can definitely be cheaper on them. But let's say you need to have really high resolution pins. Okay, so let's say the production requires us to have a mesh as smooth as this. Now, if you were to make this simulation on an object as smooth as this, the simulation is going to suffer. If you do it on something like this, it's going to go really fast. So there is a process in which you do that proxy simulation. If you're interested, let me know in the comment and I'll make a video about that. Alright, so with that said, here's the final result. I hope you enjoyed this video.